Property taxes have become impossible to ignore. They're now loud enough to influence whether people even buy in the first place, loud enough to trigger price reductions, loud enough to leave homeowners feeling stuck, wanting to move but unable to, because their total monthly payment has climbed past what buyers are willing to take on. And they're loud enough to push investors out entirely, especially when rental income no longer covers the math. In this video, we're counting down 10 U.S. cities where property taxes aren't just a side note. They're actively reshaping the housing market. Not in theory, but in very real, visible ways. You can see it in listings, in how buyers behave, in escrow statements, and in the growing number of people who decide it makes more sense to rent, relocate, or downsize rather than keep absorbing year after year increases. This isn't a political discussion. It's about basic affordability. When tax bills rise faster than incomes, the market has no choice but to react. That reaction shows up as slower home sales. It shows up as more inventory sitting on the market. It shows up in seller concessions. And in the most heavily impacted areas, it shows up as a kind of slow-moving damage, something that may look like stagnation on the surface, but feels like constant financial strain in everyday life. If you want more housing market breakdowns that focus on what people actually pay each month, be sure to subscribe to discover the cities. Number 10. Detroit, Michigan. Detroit is one of those cities where property taxes can hit especially hard, largely because of a single underlying reality. When home values are lower than in most major metro areas, the tax rate has to carry more weight to fund city services. The result is an unusually heavy tax burden for the average household, one that lands hardest on long-time owners and first-time buyers who are just trying to get their financial footing. In Detroit, the housing conversation goes well beyond the sticker price of the home. What really matters is the full monthly obligation after escrow, and whether buyers feel confident that number will remain under control. When assessments rise and taxes increase alongside them, monthly payments can jump suddenly and unexpectedly. Even if mortgage rates stay the same, that kind of surprise is enough to push a would-be buyer into renting, or to convince a hopeful homeowner that selling makes more sense. There's also a second factor that amplifies the impact of taxes in Detroit. Many neighborhoods are still grappling with vacant properties, aging infrastructure, and inconsistent public services. When residents feel like they're paying a high tax bill without seeing meaningful improvements in return, it creates a psychological disconnect. Buyers become more cautious. Investors start demanding higher returns to justify the risk. And sellers begin to realize they can't price their homes like they're in a fast-growing market when taxes are quietly eroding affordability year after year. So what happens to home prices in this environment? It doesn't always lead to a sharp collapse. Instead, it creates a ceiling. Homes that should be within reach become difficult to sell at the prices owners expect because the monthly cost isn't just principal and interest anymore. It's principal, interest, insurance, and a tax bill that can feel outsized relative to the home's value. That combination shrinks the pool of qualified buyers. Here are the warning signs to watch for in Detroit. More listings referencing tax appeals, more sellers offering credits to help offset escrow costs, and more investors limiting their focus to cash deals because financing plus taxes squeezes margins too tightly. You'll also see more homes lingering on the market, even when the list price seems reasonable compared to other cities. Number 9. Newark, New Jersey. Newark isn't just dealing with the spillover of high housing costs from the surrounding region. It's facing one of the sharpest affordability crunches in the country, largely because property taxes in parts of New Jersey can consume a surprisingly large share of a household's income. What sets Newark apart is how buyers typically arrive in the market. Many come searching for relief, an alternative to Manhattan or other North Jersey areas that have already priced out middle-income households. At first glance, the purchase prices seem manageable, even encouraging. But once buyers factor in the property tax bill, that sense of relief quickly fades. This dynamic reshapes the market in very specific ways. Buyers start gravitating towards smaller homes, condos, or properties that appear cheaper upfront but may carry hidden maintenance or repair costs. At the same time, high taxes put constant upward pressure on rents because landlords inevitably pass those costs along. When taxes go up, rents attempt to follow. When rents meet resistance from tenants, investors often decide it's time to exit. That's how property taxes end up influencing both the ownership market and the rental market at the same time. Newark also faces a built-in tension around development. As the city works to expand its tax base, it often relies on large-scale projects, new apartment buildings, and designated redevelopment zones. But when the tax system feels unpredictable, or when assessments reset sharply, both developers and buyers factor in additional risk. That hesitation can slow momentum, and when momentum slows, price growth follows. The city then tries to protect revenue, which tightens the cycle even further. For homeowners, the most painful moment often comes with escrow recalculations. A buyer may close on a home with a payment that feels just barely sustainable. Then the tax adjustment hits and the monthly payment jumps. That's not a minor annoyance. It can be the difference between financial stability and ongoing stress. When enough households feel that pressure, demand weakens and sellers are forced to compete more aggressively. In Newark, watch for inventory rising in the same property types that were most popular during the boom. Watch for price cuts that come after listings sit for a few weeks, rather than immediately. And watch buyers push harder for credits, trying to protect themselves against future tax increases. Property taxes damage the New York area market by wiping out the price advantage that attracts buyers in the first place, while adding uncertainty that makes households far more cautious. Number 8. Milwaukee, Wisconsin. Milwaukee is a clear example of how property taxes can put serious pressure on a housing market, even when home prices themselves aren't among the highest in the country. The issue isn't the sticker price, it's how large the tax bill feels compared to the home's value and the income of a typical buyer. When that tax line item gets too heavy, it stops fading into the background and starts driving the entire deal. This is especially important in Milwaukee because many buyers come in expecting that a lower purchase price will automatically make homeownership easier. On paper, the mortgage looks reasonable. Then escrow enters the picture and changes the math. Principal and interest may seem manageable, but once property taxes are added, the total monthly payment can climb closer to what buyers might pay in far more expensive metro areas. That reality shrinks the buyer pool and pushes demand towards smaller homes, properties with lower all-in monthly costs, or nearby municipalities where tax bills feel more stable and predictable. Milwaukee also highlights how property taxes can create a timing trap for homeowners. When assessments rise or levies increase, monthly payments can reset higher, even though the owner hasn't changed anything. That uncertainty affects behavior. Buyers stop stretching their budgets. They negotiate more aggressively, and they walk away faster, even from homes they genuinely like, because the risk feels too high. You can see the impact in the market itself. Homes sit longer because buyers are focused on monthly payments, not just list prices. Sellers increasingly offer closing cost credits to help soften the escrow shock. Investors grow more cautious as taxes eat into cash flow, especially when rent growth slows and can't keep up with higher carrying costs. Milwaukee can still attract buyers, but the tax burden forces everyone to demand more value. Watch for 3 key signals in the city. More listings, highlighting low taxes as a major selling feature, more buyers requesting credits tied directly to escrow costs, and more households choosing nearby alternatives, even when they'd rather live in the city, simply because the monthly payment feels safer elsewhere. Number 7. Aurora, Illinois. Aurora sits in a state where property taxes are never far from the headlines, and that context matters. Buyers in Illinois have learned the hard way that even when a purchase price looks reasonable, especially compared to coastal markets, the long-term cost of owning a home can rise much faster than expected. This is a city where many households are searching for stability, not extravagance. Aurora is family-focused, commuter-oriented, and filled with buyers who aren't chasing luxury features. What they want most is predictability. That's exactly why rising property taxes hit so deeply here. When tax bills climb, it feels like one of the core promises of suburban homeownership in Illinois is being broken. The tax burden is often tied to school funding, local government obligations, and long-standing pension costs. Buyers don't need to understand every policy detail to feel the impact. All they see is a tax bill that keeps rising, sometimes even when home values aren't increasing at the same pace. That imbalance is where market stress begins. When taxes outpace home values, a strange dynamic sets in. Homeowners feel penalized for staying put. Buyers feel discouraged from purchasing, and sellers start to realize their pool of potential buyers is shrinking because each year the total monthly payment becomes less competitive compared to renting or moving to a different county altogether. Aurora also faces stiff competition from neighboring suburbs. Many of these areas offer similar homes, comparable schools, and nearly identical commute patterns. In that kind of environment, buyers line up tax bills side by side. And when they do, the city with the heavier burden is forced to adjust through price. That's how a market slowly bends downward. It's not always a crash, it's a repricing. Homes that once sold quickly now require concessions or lower prices to offset the tax load, and over time, that becomes the new normal. Watch for a few clear signals in Aurora. More homeowners talking openly about tax appeals, more listings that highlight recent tax outcomes, and a growing reliance on first-time buyers who will only step in if prices stay at the lower end of the market. That shift often leads to softness in mid-tier inventory. In Aurora, property taxes hurt the housing market by eroding predictability, and predictability is exactly what suburban buyers value most. Number 6. Chicago, Illinois. Chicago may be one of the clearest case studies of how property taxes can quietly, but powerfully, reshape an entire urban housing market. The pressure shows up almost everywhere. Single-family homes, condos, two flats, and investor-owned properties. And in each segment, the impact looks a little different. Buyers in Chicago are dealing with a layered cost structure. Property taxes often rise alongside assessments. Condo owners face not only taxes but also HOA fees, which tend to climb as maintenance and building costs increase. Landlords, meanwhile, have to cover higher tax bills with rent. But rent can only go so high before tenants push back. Stack all of those pressures together, and the market starts behaving in noticeably different ways. Property taxes also influence where demand flows within the city. When taxes climb faster in one neighborhood than another, buyers don't just shrug and accept it, they redirect their search. That creates uneven outcomes. Some areas remain relatively stable, others see inventory pile up, and some experience sharper price cuts. The result is a city that feels like several different housing markets operating at the same time. There's also a long-running issue in Chicago that makes taxes especially emotional. Residents tend to connect their tax bills directly to the quality of public services. When people feel like they're paying more without seeing improvements in safety, schools, or infrastructure, it becomes a reason to leave. That exit pressure matters. As more households choose nearby suburbs or entirely different states, demand softens and prices are forced to adjust. The most damaging mechanism in Chicago is what many buyers experience as monthly payment shock. When taxes rise, escrow payments rise too, and suddenly the home feels less affordable than it did at closing. A buyer who was comfortable on day one may feel uneasy 6 months later. That uncertainty cools bidding behavior. Less urgency means fewer multiple offers. Fewer multiple offers mean prices stop climbing. And when prices stall while costs keep rising, the market starts to feel stuck. Watch for the warning signs in Chicago. Listings that sit longer, even in solid neighborhoods. Buyers pushing hard for credits, especially on condos with high HOA fees. Investors pulling back in areas where taxes make rental margins too thin. And higher-end properties taking longer to sell as buyers compare Chicago to other metros with lower all-in monthly costs. Chicago isn't being undone by a single problem. It's being squeezed by a cost structure that slowly makes homeownership feel less rewarding the longer you stay in the market. Number 5. Baltimore, Maryland. Baltimore is one of the clearest examples in the country of how an elevated property tax rate can warp an entire housing market. When a city's tax rate sits well above that of surrounding jurisdictions, it becomes a relocation incentive all on its own. Buyers don't need detailed spreadsheets to figure it out. They compare monthly payments and make a simple decision. That reality creates a major challenge for Baltimore. Many homes look affordable based on their sale price, which should draw interest. But once the property tax bill is factored in, the total monthly payment can rival what buyers would pay for a more expensive home outside the city limits. That comparison undercuts the city's value proposition. There's a second factor that makes taxes especially damaging here. Ongoing vacancy and uneven neighborhood conditions introduce hesitation. Buyers want to believe a city is moving in the right direction. When they see a high tax burden alongside visible signs of struggle, they assume future costs could rise even more. That expectation alone is enough to cool demand. This is how property taxes end up trapping homeowners. A resident may want to sell, but the buyer pool is thinner because everyone is aware of the tax burden. Sellers are then forced to cut prices to compensate. And even that isn't always enough if buyers remain focused on the monthly payment rather than the headline price. The result is stagnation, and in some cases, forced discounting just to get a deal done. For investors, the math is even harsher. When property taxes rise faster than rents, profit margins disappear. Once the margins collapse, investors exit. As investors sell, inventory climbs. And when inventory rises in a market already struggling with demand, prices soften even further. In Baltimore, watch for listings that highlight incentives, abatements, or special programs. Signals that the market is trying to offset high taxes with policy tools. Watch for buyers choosing nearby counties, even when they'd prefer to live in the city. And watch for a widening gap between the number of homes listed and the number of qualified, willing buyers. Baltimore shows that when property taxes sit far above regional norms, they don't just chip away at affordability, they become a structural obstacle to housing market recovery. Number 4. Portland, Oregon. Portland is a city where property taxes can quietly undermine the housing market in ways that catch many people off guard. A lot of buyers assume the biggest challenge is simply the purchase price. But in reality, taxes and local levies stack up, and when households are already strained by higher living costs, that extra burden can become the tipping point. There's another dynamic in Portland that mirrors what's happening across much of the West Coast. Buyers here are highly focused on the total monthly cost, and just as importantly, on whether that cost feels justified. When people sense a disconnect between the taxes they're paying and the quality of services they're receiving, their willingness to buy at current prices drops noticeably. Portland has also experienced meaningful shifts in migration over the past several years. When a city starts losing residents or sees slower population inflows, housing demand naturally weakens. If demand cools while public expenses remain elevated, local governments still need revenue. That pressure often lands on the households that remain, making property taxes feel heavier and more painful. In real market terms, tax pressure in Portland shows up as buyer selectiveness. Buyers demand well-maintained properties. They want strong locations. They want reassurance that a home will hold its value over time. Properties that once would have sold quickly during a hotter market now linger, because buyers are carefully weighing the full cost stack. Certain neighborhoods in Portland also have a strong investor and landlord presence. When taxes and operating costs rise but rents stop climbing, investors slow their buying or choose to sell altogether. That adds supply to the market. Watch for clear signs of this shift in Portland. Longer days on market, sellers offering concessions earlier in the listing process, buyers moving outward towards suburbs with more predictable tax structures, and higher-priced homes slowing the most. Buyers at that level have the flexibility to choose an entirely different metro if the numbers stop making sense. In Portland, property taxes don't just hurt affordability, they erode confidence. And when confidence fades, buyers stop stretching, and prices lose their ability to hold. Number 3. Austin, Texas. Austin is a city where buyers were long willing to tolerate high costs because the growth narrative felt unstoppable. But property taxes in Texas operate very differently than many newcomers expect. There's no state income tax, yet property taxes can be substantial, and rapid appraisal increases can push housing costs higher in a short amount of time. In Austin, the real damage comes from speed. When home values climb quickly, assessments often follow just as fast. That can lead to a sudden spike in the tax bill, even though the homeowner hasn't made any changes. For buyers who already stretch their budget to get in, that jump can be the line between feeling comfortable and feeling financially strained. It also reshapes how much buyers feel safe paying, because they aren't just planning for today's payment. They're bracing for the next reassessment as well. Austin also has a strong new construction and suburban expansion dynamic. When the market cools, builders frequently roll out incentives that lower effective monthly payments for new buyers. Meanwhile, existing homeowners are still carrying higher tax bills tied to peak valuations. That imbalance feels unfair, and it makes resale homes less competitive against brand new inventory. There's also a significant renter and investor component in Austin's housing market. As taxes and insurance costs rise, landlords have little choice but to push rents higher. But rent growth has limits. When rent increases stall, investors pull back. When investors pull back, demand weakens. And when demand weakens, prices begin to soften. That's how property taxes can quietly feed into a broader slowdown. In Austin, keep an eye on a few signals. More homeowners talking about tax protests and appraisal appeals. More buyers downsizing or moving farther from the city core because central neighborhoods no longer feel affordable. And more listings from recent buyers who now feel trapped by the full monthly cost of ownership. Number 2. Cleveland, Ohio. Cleveland is a city where property taxes can undercut the housing market in a way that feels especially frustrating because the home prices often look like a steal at first glance. Buyers walk in assuming a lower purchase price will translate into an easy monthly payment. Then escrow runs the full numbers, and the property tax bill completely reshapes the affordability picture. Cleveland sits in a county where property tax pressure has long been a pain point, and that pressure has become much more visible as reassessments roll through and bills climb. When assessments reset higher, buyers don't just think about the mortgage anymore. They start worrying about what happens next year and the year after that when the tax bill updates again. That uncertainty changes behavior quickly. Buyers stop stretching, offers come in lower, credit requests become more common, and people walk away faster when the monthly payment feels unstable. The damage doesn't stop at market statistics, it shows up in household behavior. When property taxes rise faster than wages, more owners fall behind. Delinquencies increase. That adds a second layer of pressure by creating forced sales, vacant homes, and listings that require additional work. In a market that already relies heavily on payment-sensitive buyers, even a modest increase in taxes can knock out a large portion of demand. Cleveland also struggles with regional competition. Buyers can move just a short distance and end up with a different tax structure, a different school district setup, and a noticeably lower monthly payment. When lowering tax exposure is as simple as choosing a nearby area, the city is forced to compete on price. That's how property taxes quietly cap the market. Not through a sudden collapse, but through slower sales, more price reductions, and a widening gap between what sellers hope to get and what buyers are willing to pay. Watch for 3 key signals in Cleveland. More listings calling out taxes as a selling point, which means buyers are actively filtering for them. More buyers asking for credits tied specifically to escrow costs rather than repairs. And more homes sitting longer on the market even when the list price seems reasonable, because decisions are being made on monthly payment, not the sticker price. Number 1. Providence, Rhode Island. Providence is a city where property taxes often become the deciding factor that brings the housing market to a standstill. The problem is timing. Tax bills hit buyers at the exact moment they're already stretched by higher monthly payments. Many people come to Providence expecting it to be a more affordable alternative to larger Northeast metros. The purchase price can look reasonable at first. Then escrow reveals the full picture, and the tax portion of the payment completely reshapes what affordable really means. What makes Providence stand out is how quickly property taxes can erase the value advantage that initially draws buyers in. When households compare Providence to nearby towns or even neighboring states, they're not just looking at list prices. They're comparing the total monthly burden, mortgage, insurance, utilities, and property taxes. Once that tax bill crosses a certain threshold, buyers tend to make one of 3 moves. They downsize their expectations, they push for a price reduction, or they step back and continue renting. The city's housing stock makes the issue even heavier. Many homes are older and come with ongoing maintenance needs. Buyers aren't just budgeting for a mortgage payment, they're also planning for repairs, higher heating costs, and regular upkeep. Add high property taxes on top of that, and buyers become far more selective and far less willing to stretch. That pressure forces sellers to cut prices, especially on homes that don't feel updated or move-in ready. For investors, Rising taxes directly disrupt the rent equation. If property taxes increase while rent growth slows, margins get squeezed. Some investors stop buying altogether, while others decide to sell. As investor demand fades, the market loses an important source of competition and inventory takes longer to clear. There are clear signs that taxes are driving the slowdown in Providence. You'll see more listings highlighting low taxes as a major selling point. You'll hear buyers asking for credits tied to escrow rather than repairs. And you'll notice price cuts appearing after homes sit on the market for weeks, as sellers realize the tax burden is shrinking their buyer pool. Providence shows how a tax-heavy monthly payment can turn a functional housing market into one that feels frozen, even when people still want to live there. Property taxes damage housing markets in different ways. In some cities, they create sudden monthly payment shock. In others, they erase the price advantage that attracts buyers. Elsewhere, they break investor math and drive inventory higher. And in places where residents feel the tax burden isn't matched by results, taxes become a catalyst for migration, and migration changes everything.